Have you ever stopped to wonder if you've never truly lived your own life? What if the decisions that shaped who you are today weren't driven by your deepest desires, but by the quiet fear of disappointing someone else? What if the greatest prison you've ever lived in wasn't a place, a person, or a circumstance, but the constant need for permission to exist exactly as you are? At first, that idea may sound like an exaggeration. But if it stirred something inside you, perhaps it's because a part of your mind already recognizes a truth it has spent years trying to hide. From a very young age, we're taught that being accepted is a matter of survival. We learn that when we behave the way people expect, we're rewarded with praise, affection, and approval. But when we express inconvenient emotions, different desires, or opinions that challenge expectations, something changes. The weight of other people's judgment becomes heavier. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Rejection begins to feel like a threat. Without realizing it, we start shaping our personalities to avoid that risk. Little by little, we stop asking, "Who am I really?" and begin asking, "Who do I need to become in order to keep being accepted?" The most frightening part is that this transformation happens so gradually that, by the time we notice, we can no longer tell where our true identity ends and where the version we created to please the world begins. Maybe that's exactly why so many people carry a constant sense of emptiness, even when they seem to have successful careers, stable relationships, or social recognition. They follow all the rules. They meet every expectation. They do everything they believe they're supposed to do, yet a quiet discomfort never goes away. A nearly imperceptible voice keeps asking, "Is this really it? Is this the life I was meant to live?" And the longer that question is ignored, the louder it becomes. It was this invisible inner conflict that Carl Jung devoted much of his life to understanding. In his view, human suffering doesn't always come from external hardships, it often comes from the distance between who we show the world and who we truly are. Jung realized that many people spend their entire lives identifying with a mask created to survive socially, believing that mask is their real identity. Meanwhile, the most authentic part of their personality remains hidden in the unconscious, waiting to be recognized. And here's the discovery that can completely change the way you see yourself. Maybe you've never lacked courage. Maybe you've simply been conditioned to believe that you needed other people's approval before you could trust your own voice. Maybe the fear that controls so many of your decisions today isn't a flaw in your personality at all, but the result of years spent living according to expectations that were never truly yours. If that feels uncomfortable, it's because we're about to step into territory that very few people have the courage to explore. The question you're about to hear may reveal something you've never noticed about yourself before. And this is exactly where Carl Jung's ideas begin to dismantle one of the deepest illusions controlling the lives of most people. Before we continue, I'd like to ask you for one small favor. If this video has already made you question something within yourself, take a second to leave a like. It may seem like a simple gesture, but it helps this message reach people who are also suffering in silence, people trapped by the fear of not being accepted, without realizing there's a way back to who they truly are. I'd also love to hear your story. Leave a comment saying, "I've felt this too." Or, if you'd rather share more, tell me about the moment you realized you were living more to meet other people's expectations than to honor the desires of your own soul. So often, realizing we're not alone is the very first step toward genuine transformation. And if you're interested in depth psychology, self-discovery, Carl Jung's ideas, and reflections that challenge the way we see ourselves, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we publish videos designed to uncover the invisible mechanisms of the mind, explore the unconscious, and help you develop a deeper awareness of who you truly are. Because this video wasn't created just to share knowledge. It was created to shift your perspective in a way that may stay with you long after you've finished watching. Now, get ready. Because what you're about to discover explains why so many people spend their entire lives chasing approval without ever realizing they're doing it. And once you recognize this mechanism operating inside your own mind, you may never look at your choices the same way again. There comes a moment in life when something begins to feel off, even when, on the surface, everything seems fine. You keep fulfilling your responsibilities. You answer messages. You smile when people expect you to smile. You work hard. You take care of others. You do what you believe is right. But somewhere deep inside, a feeling begins to grow, one that's difficult to explain. It's as if you're living a life that works on the outside but no longer feels meaningful on the inside. And perhaps that's one of the clearest signs that your true identity is trying to be heard. The problem is that almost no one teaches us how to recognize that inner call. Quite the opposite. We're encouraged to silence it. Whenever that restlessness appears, someone says it's just a phase, that we're overthinking, or that we should simply be grateful for what we already have. Gradually, we learn to distrust our own intuition. We learn that feeling deeply is dangerous and that asking difficult questions might push people away. So we keep playing the role that's expected of us, believing that if we do everything the right way, we'll finally find peace. But that peace never comes. Because there is no real peace in a life built around maintaining a mask. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." At first glance, that sentence seems simple, but it carries extraordinary depth. It reminds us that being born doesn't automatically mean living as our authentic selves. Many people reach the end of their lives without ever discovering who they really were because they spent decades perfecting a socially acceptable version of themselves. They didn't live as individuals. They lived as characters. Maybe you recognize this in the smallest details of your own life. The fear of speaking your mind to avoid conflict. The need to justify every decision as though your existence constantly requires an explanation. The guilt that appears whenever you try to set healthy boundaries. The anxiety that comes before disappointing someone. The difficulty of choosing what you truly want because, before you can even ask yourself, "What do I want?" another question immediately takes over: "What will people think of me?" That's the kind of prison with no bars, yet it limits every step you take. Jung understood that this conflict begins when we identify too strongly with what he called the persona, the social mask we create to gain acceptance. The persona itself isn't the problem. We all need it to function in society. The danger begins when it stops being a tool and starts running our lives. That's when the unconscious begins sending signals that something is wrong. Those signals appear as emptiness, anxiety, a persistent sense of feeling lost, unexplained emotional exhaustion, or the haunting feeling that an important part of you is still hidden away. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that many people interpret those signals as proof that they simply need to try even harder to please everyone else, when in reality, they may mean the exact opposite. They may be the first call from your soul, urging you to let go of a role you can no longer sustain. Jung also warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Maybe that's exactly what's been happening to you without you ever realizing it. If this reflection resonates with you, write the word "authentic" in the comments. That single word can become a quiet commitment to stop living merely to satisfy other people's expectations, and to begin looking inward with greater courage. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the need for approval is that it almost never looks like a problem. It disguises itself as something far more admirable. Sometimes it calls itself responsibility. Other times, it goes by the names of maturity, kindness, humility, or even love. That's why so many people spend years believing they're living the right way, when in reality, they've simply learned how to survive emotionally. The fear of rejection has been with them for so long that it no longer feels like fear. It begins to feel like part of their personality. Think about how many times you've swallowed your opinion just to avoid making someone uncomfortable. How many opportunities you've let slip away because you imagined being judged before you even tried. How many times you've accepted situations that hurt you simply because you didn't want to disappoint someone. Little by little, you begin bargaining away small pieces of your own essence. Each individual compromise seems insignificant, but when you look back, you realize you've given up the very thing that mattered most, the freedom to be who you truly are. There's an incredibly subtle psychological trap hidden in this process. The more approval you receive for playing a role, the harder it becomes to let that role go. After all, that mask brought you praise, recognition, and a sense of belonging. It seems to work. But while the world applauds the version of you that you've created, your true identity is quietly forgotten. And the unconscious never accepts that kind of abandonment without protest. It always finds a way to get your attention, through anxiety, an overwhelming sense of emptiness, emotional exhaustion, or that persistent feeling that something is missing, even when everything appears to be in its proper place. Carl Jung understood this mechanism with extraordinary clarity. He believed that what we repress never truly disappears, it simply grows stronger in the shadows of the psyche. That's precisely why so many people can't explain the source of their own suffering. They search for answers only in external circumstances, never realizing that the most important battle is taking place within themselves. The real conflict isn't between you and the world. It's between the person you believe you need to be and the person you were born to become. And this leads to a question that very few people have the courage to face. If no one could disapprove of your choices, what would change in your life tomorrow? Would you stay in the same job? Keep all the same friendships? Remain in the same relationships? Speak the same way? Wear the same clothes? Chase the same dreams? At first glance, the question seems simple, but it has the power to dismantle entire identities. Because more often than not, we discover that we aren't truly pursuing our deepest desires, we're simply trying to avoid other people's disapproval. Jung also said, "Who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens." Perhaps true awakening doesn't happen when you finally discover all the answers. Perhaps it begins the moment you realize how many of your choices were born out of fear rather than authenticity. That realization can be deeply uncomfortable because it forces you to confront a truth that has been buried for years. Yet this is exactly where genuine psychological transformation begins. Beneath the need to please others lies an even deeper psychological mechanism, one that Carl Jung considered essential to understanding the path of individuation. If this reflection speaks to you, leave a comment saying, "I choose to be true to myself." Sometimes a single conscious declaration is enough to mark the beginning of a far greater inner transformation than we could ever imagine. And this is where Carl Jung takes the conversation to an even deeper level. In his view, the greatest danger wasn't wearing a social mask. The real danger was forgetting that it was only a mask. The persona, as Jung called it, exists to help us function in society. It allows us to fulfill our roles, meet our responsibilities, and live alongside others. The problem begins when we spend so much time hiding behind that carefully constructed identity that we can no longer remember who exists beneath it. At that point, the mask no longer serves you. You begin serving the mask. Perhaps that's why some people experience a kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can relieve. They're not simply tired from work or responsibilities. They're exhausted from maintaining a version of themselves that demands constant vigilance. Every conversation has to be carefully measured. Every decision has to please someone. Every emotion has to be filtered so it won't make others uncomfortable. Living this way consumes an enormous amount of psychic energy because the unconscious never stops reminding you that an essential part of your personality is still waiting to be recognized. Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we reject never truly disappear. Instead, they become part of what he called the shadow. The shadow doesn't contain only our fears or flaws. It also holds our talents, desires, courage, creativity, and entire versions of who we could have become, but were forced to suppress because, at some point in our lives, we learned that expressing those parts of ourselves was dangerous. How many times have you stayed silent instead of saying what you truly thought? How many times have you hidden your sensitivity just to appear strong? How many opportunities have you walked away from because you were afraid of being different? None of those parts disappeared. They were simply pushed deep inside. That's why we often feel a strange sense of admiration, or even envy, toward people who have the courage to live authentically. It's not because they possess something we lack. It's because they express qualities that already exist within us but remain trapped in the unconscious. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That insight goes far beyond conflict. It reveals that our emotional reactions often point toward forgotten parts of our own identity. There comes a moment when the unconscious stops whispering and starts shouting. That call may arrive in the form of a personal crisis, a breakup, a painful loss, an overwhelming sense of emptiness, or a deep restlessness that seems impossible to explain. Many people see this period as failure. Jung saw it as an opportunity. Because it's precisely when the old identity begins to crumble that space is created for something far more authentic to emerge. In that sense, suffering becomes more than pain. It becomes an invitation to let go of a life built around other people's expectations and begin the journey of individuation, the process of becoming whole. If this idea awakened something inside you, leave the word "awakening" in the comments. Sometimes, simply recognizing that your transformation has already begun is the first step toward allowing it to continue. This is exactly where the turning point happens, the moment that completely changes the way you see your own life. Most people believe that freedom means being able to do whatever they want. But Carl Jung understood something much deeper. True freedom begins the moment you stop organizing your life around the need to be accepted. That's the moment you stop asking for permission to exist. And interestingly, the first thing that changes isn't the world around you. It's the relationship you have with yourself. That doesn't mean fear disappears overnight. In fact, it often grows even stronger at first. After all, for years it served as the guardian of your persona. It kept telling you that if you became too authentic, people would stop loving you, reject you, or leave you alone. The problem is that this voice isn't revealing the truth. It's simply protecting an old emotional survival strategy. For a long time, you believed you had to choose between being loved and being true to yourself. But that choice was never real. It was created by an identity that learned to confuse approval with safety. The process of individuation, as Jung described it, begins the moment you see through that illusion. Little by little, you find the courage to say no without feeling guilty, to set healthy boundaries without believing you're being selfish, and to make decisions that align with your own conscience, even when they don't please everyone else. This doesn't happen because you've stopped caring about people. It happens because you've finally realized that sacrificing who you are just to earn other people's approval was never a healthy expression of love. There's a quote from Jung that captures this transformation with remarkable clarity: "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Take a moment to feel the power of those words. They take control away from the past and place it firmly in the conscious choices you make today. Perhaps you were conditioned to live according to other people's expectations. Perhaps, from an early age, you learned that your place in the world depended on pleasing others, obeying them, or hiding important parts of yourself. But that doesn't mean those patterns have to define the rest of your life. And there's something almost no one talks about when it comes to psychological awakening. The moment you begin living authentically, some people become uncomfortable. Not because you've changed for the worse, but because your transformation exposes how deeply they are still hiding behind their own masks. Authenticity has that quiet power. It inspires some people, distances others, and unsettles those who have built their entire identity around the need for approval. If you mistake that reaction as proof that you're on the wrong path, you'll likely return to your old prison. But if you understand what's really happening, you'll realize that this discomfort is simply part of the journey toward becoming whole. And this is where the crucial difference emerges between experiencing freedom for a few moments and living every day deeply connected to your true self. If this message resonated with something inside you, leave the comment, "I choose my truth." Sometimes the most important decisions begin in silence, long before they appear in our actions. There is one truth that very few people are prepared to hear: the price of authenticity is never as high as the price of spending your entire life pretending to be someone you're not. At first, it may seem easier to keep pleasing people, avoiding conflict, and seeking approval. After all, that behavior offers a temporary sense of security. But over the years, that security quietly turns into a burden. One day, you realize you've earned the acceptance of countless people, but you've lost something infinitely more valuable: your connection with yourself. Carl Jung understood that individuation was never a path of comfort, it was a path of truth. Becoming who you truly are requires the courage to let go of outdated versions of yourself. And that means accepting that some relationships will change, that certain people will no longer understand your choices, and that not everyone will continue walking beside you throughout your transformation. What's most fascinating is that our first reaction is often to believe we're losing something precious. But in many cases, we're not losing people at all. We're simply letting go of roles that no longer belong to us. Perhaps you've noticed that some relationships only worked as long as you said yes to everything. As long as you kept your opinions to yourself. As long as you put everyone else's needs ahead of your own. The moment you begin setting healthy boundaries, those relationships are put to the test. And that can be frightening. But there's a profound difference between being loved for who you pretend to be and being respected for who you truly are. The first strengthens the persona. The second strengthens the self. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This isn't meant to be understood as a sentence to a life of suffering, but as a reminder that every psychological transformation requires leaving something behind. Just as a seed must break through its own shell in order to grow, you, too, must let go of old beliefs about who you were supposed to be. The pain isn't found in authenticity. The pain comes from resisting it. The longer we insist on holding on to an identity built solely for emotional survival, the farther we drift from the peace we've been searching for all along. And perhaps the greatest irony of all is this: the moment you finally stop asking for permission to exist, you realize you never needed it in the first place. The freedom you thought was in other people's hands was hidden within your own consciousness all along. The judgment that held you back the most never truly came from the people around you, it came from the inner voice repeating old stories you learned in childhood. When that voice begins to lose its power, something extraordinary happens. You stop living to meet other people's expectations and begin building a life aligned with your values, your essence, and your true purpose. That is the moment fear stops making your decisions for you, and self-discovery ceases to be just an inspiring idea, it becomes an entirely new way of living. If this message touched you in any way, leave a comment saying, "Today, I choose to exist as I truly am." It may seem like a simple statement, but it can also become your first commitment to the person you were always meant to become. Before we end, I'd like to leave you with one final invitation. If you've made it this far, it wasn't by accident. At some point during this video, something resonated within you. Maybe it was a feeling of discomfort. Maybe it was relief. Or perhaps it was that indescribable sensation of finally finding words for something you've been carrying inside for years. If that's the case, subscribe to the channel. This space was created for people who want to go beyond surface-level answers, explore the depth of Carl Jung's psychology, understand the unconscious mind, deepen their self-awareness, and learn how to live more authentically, free from the prison of other people's expectations. Every new video is another step on this journey of awakening and individuation, and I'm confident that the content ahead will continue to challenge the way you see yourself. Now I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment saying, "This message reflects exactly how I feel." Or, if you'd rather share more, tell us about the moment you realized you were living more to please others than to honor who you truly are. Your story may be exactly what someone else needs to read to realize they are not alone. If this video brought you value, don't forget to leave a like. That simple gesture tells YouTube this message deserves to reach more people who also need to hear these reflections on authenticity, inner freedom, and psychological transformation. And share this video with someone who constantly seeks approval, fears disappointing others, or seems to have lost touch with themselves. Sometimes a single message, heard at the right moment, can spark a transformation that years of silence never could. And don't stop here. The next video was chosen specifically to take this journey even deeper. In it, You'll discover how to recognize the signs that your true identity is trying to emerge, and why so many people ignore that call from the unconscious without even realizing it. If this video opened a door within you, the next one may reveal what's waiting on the other side. I'll see you in the next video.